In July 1991, a man ran out of a Milwaukee apartment building with a handcuff still hanging from one wrist, flagging down a police car in the street. He tells the officers a stranger tried to kill him. What they find when they follow him back inside, apartment 213 would become one of the most disturbing crime scenes in American history, and it had been happening undisturbed in that same building for over 3 years, while at least 15 other men and boys vanished from the same few blocks of Milwaukee's near West Side without anyone connecting the disappearances to each other. Jeffrey Dahmer's first killing happens in June 1978 in his childhood home in Bath, Ohio, just weeks after his high school graduation. His parents are in the middle of a bitter divorce, and both, by different accounts, have effectively already moved out. 18-year-old Dahmer picks up a hitchhiker. Stephen Hicks invites him back to drink and beats and strangles him when Hicks tries to leave. He dismembers the body and buries it in the woods behind the house, a crime that goes completely undetected for 9 years. Dahmer enlists in the Army in 1979 and is discharged early in 1981 for alcohol abuse, then moves in with his grandmother in West Allis, Wisconsin, where neighbors later describe him as polite, quiet, and increasingly withdrawn. He is arrested twice in the 1980s, once for indecent exposure, once for drugging and molesting a 13-year-old boy, a case that ends in a plea deal and probation rather than prison. In 1988, he gets his own apartment, Unit 213 at the Oxford Apartments on North 25th Street, and between 1987 and 1991, he kills at least 16 more men and boys, nearly all of them lured back with an offer of money to pose for photographs or simply to keep drinking. Here is the detail that still shocks people decades later. In May 1991, 2 months before his arrest, a 14-year-old victim named Konarak Sinthasomphones escaped Dahmer's apartment naked, disoriented, and bleeding from a hole Dahmer had drilled into his skull. Bystanders found him wandering the street and called police. Dahmer, caught up with them, calmly explained the boy was his adult boyfriend who'd simply had too much to drink during a lover's quarrel, and the responding officer, who never checked identification, never ran his name, and dismissed the concerns of the 2 black women who called it in, walked the boy back into the apartment themselves. Dahmer killed him within the hour. It would later come out that Dahmer had already been convicted of molesting this same boy's older brother 3 years earlier, a fact a basic records check would have surfaced. Dahmer's method becomes horrifyingly consistent over those final years. He drugs his victims' drinks with sedatives crushed from his own prescriptions, strangles or bludgeons them once they're unconscious, and in most cases stays with the body afterward before dismembering it in his bathtub. Investigators would later find Polaroid photographs Dahmer took at each stage of the process, stacked inside a cabinet along with the identification cards of several victims. He kept skulls and other remains as souvenirs, dissolved soft tissue in vats of acid, and in his own confession admitted to eating parts of at least one victim, describing it as an attempt to make the person and the feeling of connection he couldn't otherwise sustain permanent. Neighbors in the building filed repeated complaints to the landlord and to police about foul smells coming from Unit 213 and about the sound of a saw running late at night. Dahmer told them he was cleaning fish and repairing a freezer, and the complaint when Tracy Edwards manages to talk his way out of a pair of handcuffs and out the door on July 22nd, 1991, and flags down that patrol car, the responding officers initially have no particular reason to suspect the soft-spoken, cooperative man who answers the door at 2:13. Dahmer is calm, offers to get the keys to the handcuffs, and nearly talks his way out of the situation entirely. It's only when one of the officers doing a routine walkthrough opens the refrigerator to look for the knife Edwards described, and instead finds a human head staring back at him from the top shelf, that the true scale of what had been happening becomes impossible to ignore. What investigators find over the following days almost defies description. Human remains distributed across the kitchen, freezer, closets, and a 57-gallon drum, along with the Polaroids that let them begin identifying victims one photograph at a time. Dental records, fingerprints, and in several cases DNA testing, still a relatively new forensic tool in 1991, are used to confirm identities, since several victims are found only as skeletal remains. Milwaukee police face intense, sustained public scrutiny once the full picture emerges. Officers had returned Konarak's synthesome phone to his killer 2 months earlier, and the pattern of victims, disproportionately young, Black and Asian gay and bisexual men from a community that had reported concerns to police before and been dismissed, raises hard, still debated questions about whose disappearances get taken seriously and whose don't. 2 of the responding officers from the synthesome phone call are eventually fired, then reinstated on appeal, a decision that itself provokes lasting anger in Milwaukee's LGBTQ and Asian American communities. Dahmer is charged with 15 counts of murder in Wisconsin. The state has no death penalty and pleads guilty but mentally ill, arguing that necrophilia and the compulsions driving the killings met the legal standard for insanity. The jury rejects that defense in February 1992, finding him legally sane and criminally responsible, and he's sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms, effectively 957 years. He's separately charged in Ohio for the 1978 murder of Stephen Hicks, the case that started it all, and receives a 16th life sentence there as well. Less than 2 years into his incarceration, on November 28, 1994, Dahmer is beaten to death with a metal bar by a fellow inmate, Christopher Scarver, in a prison workshop at Wisconsin's Columbia Correctional Institution, a killing Scarver would later say he carried out in part because of how openly unrepentant Dahmer remained about what he'd done. The case triggers real, if incomplete, reforms in how Milwaukee police handle welfare checks and calls involving people of color and LGBTQ residents, and it remains one of the most studied cases in American criminology of institutional failure compounding individual evil, a case where the warning signs weren't subtle or hidden. They were reported directly, more than once, to the people whose job it was to act on them, and were dismissed anyway. The Oxford Apartments building was demolished in 1992 at the city's request, in part to stop it from becoming a dark tourist attraction. Victims' families have spent the decades since fighting for their sons and brothers to be remembered as more than footnotes to their killer's name. A fight that resurfaced publicly in 2022, when several families publicly objected to not being consulted before a major streaming dramatization of the case went into production. If you want the next case file, subscribe. New files unlock every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday.